Hello, welcome to our podcast on the role of education, which is the third of an eight series podcast on the title Education Foundation Series. The role of education consists of functionary actions and activities assigned to and required or expected of education, an educated person or group of persons. What are the actions or activities assigned to education? Point number one, personal development or development of the human person. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, Part 2, states that education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. Why? Because the most valid and infinite resource for development in the world is the human resource. Hence, the most valid and infinite development capital is the human capital. Personal development, or the full development of the human capital, is the sterling typification of education and the cornerstone of every other form of development, economic development, and others. The social construct of development further elucidates or clarifies the juristic role of education. In the UDHR Article 26, Part 2 tacit equation, A. Education shall be directed to B. The full development of C. The human personality. Education, full development, and the human personality. Hence, the full development of the human capital is legally indicted as the direction of education. Point number two, the social construct of development expounds that development is a human process in the sense that human beings like you and me, not material factors, drive development. If development is therefore a human process, then full development can only be triggered by education directed to the full development of the human personality, mentally, behaviorally, temperamentally, and emotionally. The education, energy, and aspiration of people who seek development form the motive force that drives development. People's awareness about the role of education will decide the direction of development. Their efficiency, productivity, creativity, and organizational capacities determine the level of development. Development is therefore the outer realization of latent inner potentials nurtured by education. The level of human development, intensity of aspiration and energies, quality of attitudes and values or personality, skills and information will affect the extent and pace of development. B. What actions or activities are required and expected of education, educated persons, or group of persons? What actions or activities are required and expected of education, educated persons, or group of persons? Let us highlight economic development, for example. According to the aforesaid legal and social construct of development, that nominates the trifactor of education responsible for and directed to two, full development of three, the human person, as the driver of development. What development actions and activities or processes are required or expected of educated persons or groups to impact the economy of society? And how do these required or expected actions further enumerate the role of education? Three major actions or activities or processes are required and expected to define economic growth in a society. And we are all members of the interdependent societies that make up the world. These three processes are the system of production, the system of distribution, and the system of management of economic assets or values or wealth. These three economic processes, activities, or systems are mandatory or compulsorily the officially required driving factors of economic growth, compulsorily called for by the human factor, who is the official or functionary driver of development. What's the meaning of all this? If the human factor is the official dispatcher of the aforementioned three economic processes, production, distribution, and management of economic values, assets, or wealth, then the role of education by law is to direct full development to the human factor to accomplish such mandated or compulsory realistic areas of the economy, rather than the known frugal, illusionary, unreal learning. Illusionary, fabricated learning or education, grossly promoted by academia, is responsible for misplacing the role of education. UN Resolution on the Right to Development, Article Edition 41, 128 Preamble, and Article 2, Part 1 affirm that the human person is the central subject of development and that development policy should therefore make the human being the main participant and beneficiary of development. This therefore avows development as a human process and the human person as the author and driver of the development process. You and I are the only economic drivers. No one else is coming to help us. It's time we officiate that as the role of education. Beneficiaries and benefactors alike, parents, educators, supposed educational providers, stakeholders, both government and private, should abandon unlawful, unscientific, uneconomical, wasteful, traditional theoretic education that ciphers not economic value. Education and the economy have a linear, one dimensional relationship. Hence, the role of education is to fully develop us, to take up our inviolable responsibility to fully develop our societies. Here are some takeaways regarding the role of education. According to international universal law on education, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, Part 2, education shall be directed. Direction is a legally binding ascription to education. UDHR Article 26, Part 2 posits the direction of education is the full development of the human personality or human capital, meaning the direction of education is not vague, indecisive, or indefinite. No, the full development of the human capital, who is the soaring agent and invigorator of development, is the direction of education. The full development of the human capital, outlined as the central subject of development by law, is the role of education. Thank you for listening to this podcast on the role of education. In our next podcast, we'll dissertate about the world of education.